for that. That was very good. And thank you to all for bringing our word this morning. But what a life, eh? What a story of Job. There's so much going on for him, isn't there? There's just a lot taking place. It's a very heavy story. And I mentioned before, I think at times, how it's good for us to try and put ourselves in the scenario that we read about it. It can help us to understand and help us to sort of try and imagine and picture what's going on. And it got me thinking here, how would we feel if we're in Job's shoes, or sandals, as Job was probably wearing then? But how are we feeling in his position? Perhaps not to the extent that Job was suffering, or perhaps we have, but we're looking at finding here the presence of God in the midst of our trials and our suffering. And also that we can rest assured in our trust that we place in him. So our reading this morning covered across a number of verses that you would have heard, but I wanted us to be able to capture, really be able to capture such an integral part of that story of Job. To really know and just feel what may have been going on for him at that time, and what we can also learn from his story. So it's a pretty dark story at times, as we've heard, but it's one with such a rich message. It's one with such a rich message and a powerful image of faith that I think shines through. And so suffering is rarely fun, is it? It's not something that we sort of get excited about. You don't often hear people say that they went through some terrible anguish and it was amazing. It's not a common thing to hear. It's an odd thing to come out with, I think. The result sometimes can be rewarding from persevering, though, and that's the key. But for all of us, we have different capacities as to how much we can handle, how much we can take on, and what affects us, and we all deal with those things differently. For some of us, it may be something relatively minor that can cause us to be agitated. Something that can cause us to get angry, to feel as though we're suffering. Perhaps you might be someone who's relatively strong. You feel unbreakable. You feel like you have a fairly tough exterior and not much can get through. It can even be circumstantial and be determined by our perspectives in life. So, looking at perspectives, some families may live in a tiny house. They struggle to pay bills and rent, and yet they are the happiest people on earth because they have each other and they enjoy working hard and they just really love being there for each other. On the other hand, you could have someone living in quite a large house. They have lots of close family, not really have to worry about money, but they may feel, though, that they're suffering because they were passed over for a job or a promotion at work. I'm not saying that either of these are right or wrong, but all I'm saying here is the perspectives may look different, and what we each see as struggles in our own lives will be different for each of us. Either way, though, I can be fairly certain that none of us are absolutely invincible, although we may feel that way. Does anyone feel invincible? Is no one invincible here? Okay. Not since the Cowboys lost, no. Brad's no longer invincible. But no, we're not. As much as we like to think we can be at times. And just as you see in Job's story, life can be grand. Life can be going well. Life was going well for Job. He thought things were peachy. He thought everything was going great. But in a moment's notice, it can be taken away. So you only have to turn on the news these days, or open up Facebook, or listen to the radio, and it's just filled with a lot of negative things, isn't it? Just so much negativity there, if it's interest rates going up, or petrol prices, there's car accidents taking place, sickness in the world. We could go on and on, but, we won't. But at times, things can appear dire, can't they? Things can appear like, there's no end in sight for these suffering times. And it actually got me thinking when I was looking at this, and, from time to time you hear people talk about the end times and trying to make predictions, don't you? We hear about predictions for the end times. There's things that are going on in the world, there's wars or disease, or whatever clues they think they've put together to use. And it causes them to say, right, I think this is a date where it's all going to come to an end. And so I did have a little look, and there's a Wikipedia page, so academics in the room don't hate me. I did source a Wikipedia page for this. But people have been predicting that things are falling apart so badly and that the world will come to an end as far back as 66 AD. 66. It's not 1966, not 1566, the year 66. People have been predicting the end times. And the list honestly went on and on. If you're curious and you want to look for yourself, by all means, there is also, I did notice multiple entries from the same people, which I thought was interesting. You thought they would have learnt after, if not the first, at least the second or third time, that they probably aren't on the right track here. But there was upwards of 200 of these predictions on there. And also, by the way, the next one's in 4 years' time if you're interested, so get all your effects in order. But no, we know that's not true. We know that God has told us in his word that the time and place we will not know. But people have been caused to think about this because of the devastation and suffering that they see around them. And now in our story this morning, in our passage that we had read, we see the most horrific instances take place for Job. Such horrific instances. And now you may know, back in this time, owning cattle, animals, land, being a farmer, you were doing quite well. Just as they do today, farmers, they played quite a pivotal role in society and they provided people with many great things. So this was a big part of Job's life. Now these terrible, horrifying attacks that came down on Job began with his animals, the livestock, his livelihood being taken away or killed off. And not only that, but along with his servants as well. So his possessions were all taken from him. The donkeys, the oxen, the camels, the sheep, all gone, along with the human life that was there to care for them. How devastating, right? This has all just been taken away from Job. And then comes a big one, in my view, that I think most of us can empathise with, but Job's own family. Now put yourself, if you haven't already, in Job's position here. It's been one thing after another after another. Job is there, the messenger after messenger is coming, continuously delivering bad news. There'd been 3 of them by this point. And then a 4th messenger comes in. I know, if I'm thinking, oh geez, what else could go wrong? What's wrong now? There can't be anything possibly left to destroy. And they tell you, there's been a terrible accident. The wind swept in at your son's house. And so for me, I'm thinking Job in that situation, he's thinking, well, that's where all my children are. They're all together. They're all enjoying each other's company, having fun together. And then the messenger continues, this wind, it destroyed the pillars of the house and it collapsed. They're all dead. But how do you respond to something like that? How do you process something like this in your mind? And we see how Job responded. Job, who was a servant of God, he was holy, righteous, a humble man, blameless and upright. He's just had his world turned absolutely upside down, sideways, in every which other way. His life has just been turned into an absolute mess. So what does he do? He gets up, he tears his robe, and he shaves his head. Now, in these biblical times, the meaning behind that shaving of the head, it was to signify someone was in mourning. Was the purpose of that. So he was mourning these losses. He was mourning this suffering. But then he cries out with this remark, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." It's unbelievable to read that. Unbelievable to read that response. That is not what I would have imagined by any means someone saying after all this taking place. So as I said, we have different things and the circumstances that affect us in our lives. with a variety of contexts and perspectives. But I think when I tried to think about this for myself, and with what I saw was a major setback, and how I vividly remember how I handled that time and what took place in my life for that. And I think I've shared with a fair few of you, but it took me back to this place, and I think of it a lot because I just see that the work that God did. But shared about the time where I was at the police academy in Sydney, in New South Wales, and I was only a month and a half off graduating. So I'd done most of the hard work, and we were almost there. And now, not to say that I was any victim by any means, but I got a speeding ticket, I'll share it with you. But I was asked to leave, long story short. So I had to leave. After 6 months of this training, this study, was doing quite well. And I had to leave. And I can remember that day, I can picture it, I can see it. I can still remember walking down the stairs with my blanket and everything, the last few things I had to put in my car to drive home. And I was devastated. It was terrible. That was my life, that was where I was going, that was my dream, that was my week to week. And it was now gone. Just like that, it was gone. And I just remember thinking that I don't know what I'm doing now. I was lost, I was confused. And now was my response in that moment to say, well, the Lord gave me this opportunity and experience, so it's up to him if he takes it away. I'll be honest with you, absolutely it wasn't. That was not my response. There was hurt, there was anger, there was grief. But there came a time a little bit later, and it took a while, but there came a time where I sought God and the direction that he wanted me to head in life. My point here is that it was hard to respond as we see Job responded. Whatever our circumstances in life, it's hard to respond that way, isn't it? It's hard for us to respond that way. We read that in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. He never put the blame on God. He never told God, this is your fault, why have you done this? Not once did he turn his back on God or criticise him. So often in my own life, if things aren't going right, or disaster strikes, or when there just doesn't seem to be a way out, it can take time. And I badly want to ask the question, God, I know you didn't make this happen, but why couldn't you have helped stop it? Why couldn't you have helped? And as I was writing this, I just had one incredible answer come to mind, and I think, maybe if we look into our lives, we can see where God has done this for each of us, but I just felt this overwhelming sense of joy, and I felt shivers when I felt God say to me, because if I did step in, then you wouldn't be where you are today. If I did step in, you would not be where you are today. And I'm so glad that he didn't. I'm so glad that he didn't. Do things hurt in our life? Have we felt unsure, insecure, lost? Of course. That's a part of our lives. But we can look back and we can see just exactly how God uses our situations for his good. He can use these situations when we allow him to work in and through us. So with our text here this morning, the purpose of all this taking place is not to test Job and not to test his allegiance to God, but rather to give him an opportunity to honour God. And that's exactly what we have. In our lives, we have this opportunity to stand firm in God, even when we don't have the answers. A lot of our time, our human instincts, we want to seek answers, don't we? We want to know what the answer is. What is the solution? Let's just cut to the chase. Tell me what the answer is so we can solve this. We have this need to know and this desire to have the answer for all that life throws at us, don't we? But sometimes all we need is trust, and trust in God. And so just a little insight into the end of Job, if you haven't already read through it all, you don't know the whole story, but Job didn't get answers either. he cries out to God. He says that he must have an explanation. He does, the frustration gets to him, and he demands that God reveals himself and tells him why. Why is this taking place? So is that human side of Job there that we can resonate with? We want to know why. We want an understanding of what's going on. Although in all this, he did not curse God, but he still wanted answers. Now, Job's wife also, she definitely wanted answers. By this point, she's over it. She's over it. She's seen just about enough, and she calls on on Job to curse God for what is happening to him. She wants Job to curse God. She's like, you can't keep going through this. This is enough. And Job replies with a line that I would never, ever recommend. And I've only been married 8 months. You are talking like a foolish woman. I mean, it's hard to imagine the exact moment and the situation, the feelings going on for Job in that space, but that is one brave man. Let me tell you. That is, yes, if he thought he'd been suffering up to that point. But he continues, though, with a profound statement. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? And again, in all this, Job did not sin in what he said, although he was sleeping on the couch that night. So, you win some, you lose some. But he did not sin in what he said. This incredible response once again from Job. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Job has taken this opportunity, as I mentioned before, to honour God. Job knows where he stands with God. He knows where his place is in the kingdom of God. And so what reason does he have to question God's wisdom? God has been faithful to Job on countless occasions, and he is certainly aware of how blessed he is. When we remember God's faithfulness to us, God is showing us that we can stand firm in our trust in him. Evil and suffering came Job's way that day. But it wasn't his possessions or his family or his health that was the target. It was his faith and his trust and his loyalty to God. The enemy tried to prove that Job was only faithful because of what God was doing for him, for what God had given him. But Job stood tall, he stood firm, and he said, my faith isn't in the things around me. My faith is in God and his will for my life. I feel we can apply some of this godly wisdom in our responses to life's circumstances, to give God our heart and soul in worship, and to acknowledge God's faithfulness to us. And I was thinking about this, and my mind went to, thinking about things going on in the world at the moment. And I was thought about, those fleeing the things going on in the Ukraine and all that's happening over there at the moment. And we might not be hearing as much about it or seeing as much about it at the moment, but it's still going on. And it's certainly not over for so many people over there. And of course, in so many similar situations that, that are around the world, it's not unique just to Ukraine, and which is a sad statement in itself. But I was doing some reading and I came across this one particular article from Europe called Evangelical Focus. And there was a line in there where a Christian journalist was quoted as saying, "It is scary to hear the noise of the military planes, not knowing if it is the Ukraine or if it is the enemy. It's a very dangerous situation." So it sets a little bit of a scene there for them. They were, doing what we're doing. They were sitting, they were worshipping, they were praising God. And their lives were flipped upside down. All of a sudden there's these noises, these planes, these things and explosions going off around them. And they didn't know if it was, people protecting them that were close or if it was the enemy that was getting closer. What a scary thought to be a part of. I couldn't imagine it. So everyday Christian people there, they're going about their business and this fear is suddenly upon them. It goes on though, this article, and there's a quote from the Ukraine Evangelical Theological Seminary. Say that 10 times fast. The Ukraine Evangelical Theological Seminary. And they said to their students, they said that with an attack on our country, we can use it as a reason not to panic, but to remember how many times God in his word says, don't be afraid. And that prayer and trust in God gives us strength. That is where we get our strength. And so that's a bit of a Job moment there for me. To not use fear to control us in times of suffering. Don't let that fear take over, but rather use it and choose to use it as a moment to remember that God is with us and we can trust him. Now that's a bold statement, it's a bold instruction, absolutely. But at the same time, it's standing firm in God. Standing firm in God. Get the guys to come forward and help us in some reflection in just a moment. But in life, we all have ups and downs, don't we? We always have ups and downs in life. You don't need me to tell you that. That's just how it is. And not everything will go to plan. But the important thing that we need to remember is God is with us. God is with us and we can put our trust in him and stand firm in that. I'm not saying we have to be exactly like Job. That's a hard act to follow. That is very hard. But we can certainly take a leaf out of his book. We can certainly look to his example as to what it means to live a life trusting in God no matter what comes our way. Not that he has to, but God has proven himself faithful time and time again in this world, hasn't he? God has proven his faithfulness. Now, I don't want to speak for everyone, but if we were to sit and reflect on the moments in our life where we felt scared or fearful or of what is happening in our midst, then I'm sure we could discover within those times that God has come through and he has delivered us. We all have choices in life, and these are times when this applies. We have the choice to make our own decisions in how we react. Some people use their choices to do horrible things that don't make sense to some of us, things that can cause us to suffer. But our story this morning asks us if we will stand firm in our trust of our loving Heavenly Father. Just as when the enemy made a choice to attack Job and his family and his possessions, Job had to make a choice. My question to us this morning is this: when those trials come our way, when we face suffering and all hope may seem lost to us, when God has said, "Have you considered my servant Brad?" Or "Have you considered my servant Phil?" What will our response be? Will we choose to put our hope and trust in the Lord and give him the honour? God has shown us that we can trust him. Will we choose to remain faithful to the God who loves and cares for us? If there is one thing we can be confident in, it is this: that no matter what is going on around us, when things seem as though they may be falling apart, we can stand firm with our trust in the Lord. We can stand firm with our trust in the Lord. We're going to sing this song in the time of reflection now, talking about building our life upon God's love, because God is a firm foundation. God is immovable. We can put our trust in him and know that we are secure. We can put our trust in him alone and we will not be shaken. We cannot be shaken if our trust is in God. So take this time to reflect, pray with someone if you need to, but use this time and just reflect on what God is telling you and showing you in your life, and how we can just come to him and trust him more and more.